Books today with Eddie Glaude and Kiese Laymon. They're going to have a discussion based on Eddie Glaude's recently published Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons for Our Own. I'll put in a plug right here at the beginning. Here's the book. It's one of our Crossroads selections. If you order the book, it's a 15% discount. And we've got some copies that have been signed on a Square Books book plate, like so, if you're interested. And let me quickly announce a few upcoming events. One tomorrow, University of Mississippi law professor and director of the Innocence Project, Tucker Carrington, will be in conversation with Brittany Barnett, another lawyer and the author of A Knock at Midnight, which is an urgent call to free those buried alive by the American justice system. Then the following day, on Thursday, our longtime friend, the marvelous Kentucky writer, Bobby Ann Mason, will be discussing her new novel, Dear Anne, with Lisa Howarth, which is naturally going to be interesting. Today's event is our third Square Books Crossroads book group event, something that we announced within days after the murder of George Floyd as a way to pursue a path forward with Black Lives Matter through reading and discussing relevant books. This event is being recorded and will be available for replay in 24 hours. Our next Crossroads event will occur September 26th with a discussion led by Afton Thomas and joined by Latoya Falk and Hannah Lee, focused on a middle grade book, The Only Black Girls in Town by Brandy Colbert. This event will be targeted to an audience of parents and educators. On October 15th, the Crossroads selection is Down Along That Devil's Bones with its author, Connor Town O'Neill, and host Brian Foster. The book's subtitle is A Reckoning with Monuments, Memory, and the Legacy of White Supremacy. And the author follows the various attempts and instances to remove monuments to Nathan Bedford Forrest, quote, that devil. Probably many of you know that he was the most vicious Confederate leader in the Civil War and once led the slaughter of over 100 Union unarmed Black soldiers outside Memphis at Fort Pillow. I add my own enthusiastic endorsement of this book to that of one of our guests today, Kiese Laymon. By the way, all Crossroads book group selections are available at a 15% discount from Square Books. Now, we're delighted to have these two gentlemen, Kiese Laymon, in conversation with Eddie Glaude, author of Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lesson of Our Own. Eddie Glaude is a Moss Point, Mississippi native who today is director of the African American Studies program at Princeton University, is the author of 7 books previous to Begin Again, and is a frequent guest, as probably most of you know, on MSNBC. Hosting Eddie Glaude is Kiese Laymon, professor of literature and creative writing here at the University of Mississippi, and the author of 3 books, including a personal favorite, and I'm sure of many of you too, Heavy, winner of the 2018 Carnegie Medal. I also want to mention that he has a simply amazing piece in the current issue of Vanity Fair. His cover looks like that, as does Jesmyn Ward. Hurry today to read that. You'll be very interested in that. Begin Again is an unusual book, a blend of history, biography, political philosophy, and it is both authoritative and personal in its delivery. I can't imagine a more exemplary book at this moment than Begin Again to help us understand the lie of America, to understand the intellectual travail of James Baldwin, and how to find our way forward to begin again. It is the very sort of book, better than, that we could have hoped for when we set out to create this Crossroads book group. Given especially the perilous state of the nation today, and as Eddie Glaude says, in citing the failures following the Civil War and Reconstruction and more. Again, following the civil rights movement of 60 or 70 years ago, we already have 2 strikes. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Eddie Glaude and Kiese Laymon.
All right, all right. How you doing, brother?
Man, I'm so excited. Thank you, Richard, for that wonderful introduction. It's just such a delight to have an opportunity to talk with you, Kiese.
I feel real blessed right now. I want to thank Sammy and Richard for making this happen. I just want to jump right in it. Before we start, though, I want to encourage you all, if you have questions, to please send them in the chat, and we're going to get to as many as possible and try to weave them into the conversation in an organic way. So I am very thankful to be here talking about a book that I called A Rugged Literary Miracle. There's no hyperbole in that. And I'm even more thankful to be here with a Mississippian who I have called a real big brother for like the past 6 years, and an imaginary big brother ever since I read Exodus back in the day when I was in graduate school. So Begin Again is part travel writing, part biography, part literary analysis, part memoir, part some other things, right? But I'm interested, Eddie, in not just how you got so good at those different genres of writing, but what does Moss Point, Mississippi have to do with how you got so good at writing and witnessing?
Wow. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure and an honor. You know, anybody who watches me on MSNBC, they know Heavy is always right above my right shoulder. It's always right there. So it's been a pleasure to kind of, you know, to take this journey in the time that we have together, and to try to leave something behind in the short time that we have.
Yes.
So in so many ways, Begin Again is a journey, is my journey to kind of embracing the idea of myself as a Southern writer, as someone who understands that Moss Point has shaped the sound of my sentences. It has shaped in some ways how I see, and it's really this kind of exacting relationship I had with Jimmy that helped me understand that. I've said before that Baldwin is an exacting companion, because he believes in the Socratic dictum that the unexamined life isn't worth living. And so as I was trying to write the book, I kept coming across these formulations that demanded that I examine the messiness of my own interior life. I had to deal with the scaffolding of my own lives. And Heavy is so important in this regard because I had to deal with the wounds of my own formation in some ways. Deal with the fact that I'm a vulnerable little boy, raised in this small town by 2 people who I love dearly, but one man who scared the hell out of me. And how I had to navigate that fear. And so Moss Point shapes how I see, how I hear. Baldwin freed me to risk that sound, that pitch on the page. So these sentences in Begin Again, they're different than the sentences in Democracy and Black and the sentences in A Shade of Blue and in Exodus. I was kind of free to do something different there. And it also freed me up to try to do something at the level of form that kind of captured what it means to grow up in the Gulf Coast, what it means to grow up between Mobile and New Orleans, what it means to not really know those other Mississippis, right? So Jackson is the big city for me. The Delta is a foreign space. I grew up on the coast. So it's a different kind of experience. It's, you know, so how this book helped me tap into all of that is a long-winded answer to say I'm still trying to figure it out.
Love that answer, brother. And it's so interesting to me that Baldwin, in some way, opened so many of us up from the South, though he wasn't like a great writer of the South. Can we talk about that for a bit?
Oh man, absolutely. You know, when Jimmy winds up in Florida interviewing those students, and you know how he describes certain things, you just kind of say, oh brother, just don't, he just doesn't know. Even though he's a child, of immigrants. His mother Bertus is on the eastern shore of Maryland. His father is from Louisiana, down in New Orleans area. So there's a sense in which, you know, when you read Go Tell It on the Mountain, it's a migration narrative. It's a migration story, right? It's this generation, that the first generation born in the city. So, you know, you can imagine being the child of Southern parents, that, you know, he's going to be eating, you know, greens, and he's going to have his candy yams, you know, somebody's going to be making some water bread or some hot corn, you know, some whole cake bread or something like that in the house. But there's a sense in which when he makes his way to the South, he's afraid, right? He's fearful because it's unknown. It's almost got this kind of Joseph Conrad vibe to it, you know, that he's moving into the heart of darkness. And for me, the South is of course shot through with fears, but you know, it's not the heart of darkness.
No.
You know what I mean? It's not that at all, right? They're ghosts that haunt, but there are also these joys, you know, these, you know, it's fish fries and Al Green and Bobby Blue Bland, and you know, it's a kind of that humidity that sticks to, you know, that makes your clothes stick to you while you're playing, you know, picking up and running outside, right? That's for those of you who don't know that we used to throw the ball up. Who catches it? Let's go.
Let's go.
You know.
Wait, what did y'all call it? We called it throwback in Jackson.
We call it pick it up and running.
Oh, okay, we call it throwback. You just throw that shit back and you get it. You better go.
You gotta go. You know, so that sort of thing, or cat ball when we, you know, how we play baseball and whatnot. So it's not the heart of darkness for me. So there are these moments when Jimmy's describing the South where he gets it so right. And then there are these other moments where he reveals that he's from Harlem.
Right.
You know, and it was in those spaces, you know, to be honest with you, it was those moments and a moment with Nikki Giovanni that actually freed me up. Because Baldwin is such a masterful writer,
right,
that it's hard not to lose your voice.
Absolutely.
Where you try to become imitative, and your sentences sound like his, and suddenly you're writing these long Jamesian sentences with all of these damn commas and da-da-da-da.
Yes.
And you know, so Baldwin's prose can become imperial and just run over you like a Budweiser can in the street. So when I found those moments where he got it wrong, right? Or that moment when Nikki Giovanni told him, lie to me.
Right. Whew.
You know, I was like, oh, okay, this is how you're supposed to walk with him.
Yeah.
This is how you can walk with him. And I've been teaching him for 30 years, but and writing with him for 30 years. But it was in those moments that I said, okay, all right, okay, Jimmy, let's go.
It's so interesting and really like beyond interesting to me how the slippages in how we want to see Baldwin allow some of us permission to go inside of us and to touch a Baldwin that we might not see unless we push. And I'm really interested, Eddie, in how Bessie Smith, he says, gave him permission to like see that for himself. Can we talk about that a bit?
Yeah, no, you know, absolutely. You know, because he's sitting over in Switzerland or over in Paris and trying to figure out how he's going to eat, hanging out, doing what he's doing. And this novel that's got him on the ropes, and he's longing for a sound of the language that comes to him as natural as breath. He's longing for something, right? He knew he had to get out of the States in order to create the conditions. Let me put it this way. He knew he had to leave the States in order to have the freedom to imagine himself as a writer, to make that a concrete reality, to avoid the corrosive hatred that was taking root and metastasizing, to mix my metaphor. But then, you know, as he was working his way to the conclusion of that first novel, there was something about the language, the sound of Bessie Smith that gave him entree and access to what anchored his spirit, you know? And then it freed up his pen, right? It freed up his pen. So there's something about not romanticizing Black cultural practice, not creating some fiction as the ground to do one's work, but really, what does it mean to inhabit the complexity of Black life? And for me, to inhabit the complexity of Black Southern life.
Yes.
As the ground for finding one's voice. Because as I've been giving these talks about the book, suddenly the Mississippi accent that I had lost on purpose, I'm hearing it show up in the way I say heart, or you know, something happens and I'm like, what's going on here? What am I performing? What is this, right? And it's something about inhabiting this space that has freed me up to move into this next phase. And I think reaching for Bessie in that moment was kind of reaching for a sound, an authentic sound that could free up his pen.
And to keep going with that, in the beginning of Nobody Knows My Name, I think it's in the introduction, Nobody Knows My Name, he says, I decided I was gonna be a writer, God, Satan, and Mississippi notwithstanding.
Yeah.
What did Mississippi do to earn or be diminished, depending on how you see the status next to God and Satan in Jimmy Baldwin's mind? Why God, Satan, and Mississippi notwithstanding? And he'd never been down here at that point.
No, not at all. You know, that's a real fascinating question, right? Because in the American imagination, it seems to me, an imagination that exceptionalizes the South as the bearer of its sins.
Right.
Mississippi stands out. You know, Mississippi is the metaphor for America, to echo Richard Wright. Right. And so there's this sense in which the contradictions of the state, its beauty, its terror, right, its exquisite quality and its horror, all stand alongside each other. You know, it's like the beauty of Mississippi nature, but you go out that, you know, them horse flies and the snakes, and, you know, there's something about, you know, people like, did you camp when you were little? Hell no, we didn't go camping. Why? Snakes, horse flies, you know, water moccasins. Anything else I need to say to you about this? And so I think it's the kind of contradiction of Mississippi, but more specifically, you know, this is the closed society. Mississippi became in some ways symbolically representative of the brutality of America's white supremacy, of America's racial hatred in some ways. So in some, almost he's being redundant in his imagination, because it's God, Satan, and Mississippi. Mississippi makes Satan concrete.
Let it go.
Satan's not an abstraction once he says Mississippi.
Right.
In his imagination, you know? Yes. So that's what I'm thinking, man.
I like that. I wanna do something that I've never done on one of these, really. I want to read some of your words back to you and kind of get into the crafting of the sentences and what you hope for, like the deployment of the sentence. Sure. You write that narrating trauma fragments how we remember. Short, precise sentence, right? We recall what we can and what we desperately need to keep ourselves together. I want to know why so many Black artists from Mississippi, including me, feel not just the need, but the have to get out of Mississippi. And I'm wondering if, like, do you feel a part of your leaving Mississippi prepared you to sort of like rigorously find the trauma in your rememberings of Mississippi? And does it also free you up to find the joy? Right. So I'm using your quote to kind of take us backwards to Moss' point. Narrating trauma fragments how we remember. We recall what we can and what we desperately need to keep ourselves together. Did leaving give you the opportunity and the space, or whatever the word, the verb, the noun is, to actually like find the contours of the trauma, and in navigating the contours of trauma, were you able to also find some joy at home?
Man, it took a while. I basically ran away from home.
Okay, talk about that.
Me and, you know, my dad I love my pops. You know, we got a great relationship now, but back in those days, you know, he could look at me and scare me to death. I don't know how to describe what it means to be young and have fear deposited in your gut.
Right.
And so in so many ways, I've been trying to prove over the course of my life that I'm not a coward, that I'm not afraid. And so I knew that I had to get out or something was going to happen.
Yeah.
Right. And so I was good in school. It came easy. Nobody, you know, because my dad, you know, my mom dropped out of school to have her first baby in the 9th grade. My dad left early to go to Vietnam. There are no books in my house. The only thing people did, they read the Mississippi Press Register. That's it.
Wow.
So there are no books. There's no college in my family really that I knew about. There's no books anywhere around. So it's almost self-invention. You know, Jimmy would say there was, you know, he had to create himself in some ways out of nothing.
Yes.
Right. And so there are no resources around. I'm just picking them, you know, picking them. And so when I decided I was gonna leave and go to college early. And so my dad, who's this contradictory dude, took me to Mobile to do an interview with Georgetown.
Oh,
because
shit.
he used to say to us, I don't care what you're gonna do, but when you turn 18, you got to get the hell up out of here.
Yes, indeed.
Right. And I don't want you to stay in Moss Point because you ain't gonna amount to shit if you stay here.
Right.
And so he took me out there, but my sister had gone to Spelman.
Oh.
And she was valedictorian of our high school. And she went to Spelman because a guidance counselor who worked at our high school was a Spelmanite. And so, like, you know, chain migration, you know, she was sending folk, the bright kids, to the AUC. And so my sister came home and said to me, "You too white.
Ooh.
You need to get yourself together." Because I was 15.
Okay.
I was 14, 15 years old. And so she said, you need to get yourself together. And so I decided to lie and go to the summer science program at Morehouse. And I lied that I wanted to be a doctor because I wanted to get away from my dad. And this is a long way to answer your question, Kiese, but I'm sorry. So I got into the summer science program and I walked into the admissions office to Dean Sterling Hudson's office. And I said, I want to convince you not to send me home. And I walked out of there with a scholarship.
Damn.
And I called my mama and I said, I'm not coming home. So I ran away, but I ran away to college.
Yes.
And it was there that I started this path of this manic act of self-creation, you know, drinking 40s, doing this. I became the Black nationalist, doing, you know, just constantly trying on these different selves. But every night there's a dream, recurring dream, me and my dad catching up. And right when I'm about to get him, I'm about to dust it, I wake up. And those dreams carried me all the way into graduate school and passed. So I left and I didn't really have a language to narrate the trauma because my discipline comes from him. Yeah. My drive comes from him. My moral center comes from him, right? My rage and anger comes from him. I look exactly like him, right? I mean, it's carbon copy of him. We stand next to each other. It's crazy. So I found myself until my mama told me I needed to come home and talk to him. Just willing myself into a different way of being in the world. I was from Mississippi, but it wasn't present. You know, it would show up every now and then. Exodus, my great grandmama, trying to explicate some wisdom from her, but more narrating trauma, fragments how we remember.
Yes.
That whole paragraph is a riff on Toni Morrison's Remembering.
Right.
And me trying to deal with the structure of No Name in the Street and me trying to deal with how I got to where I am now with regards to my dad. That's so incoherent. I'm sorry.
Oh, brother, that shit is not incoherent. You see, I hope we see a recording of this, because I need to see the skeleton of that in the next essay, if possible. And just for people, you know, who don't have Begin Again yet, and I'm sure you're all gonna get it after we get off of this Zoom. Make sure you get it from Square Books, Begin Again. Begin Again, like, talk to me about the importance of that as the title, right? Begin Again, especially for Baldwin, someone who was so critical of traditional notions of American progress. Tell me how Begin Again is actually antithetical to traditional notions of American progress.
Oh, absolutely. You know, Baldwin understands that, you know, this American ideology of America is always already on the road to a more perfect union. Right? It's one of the ways in which it clings to its adolescence. That American exceptionalism is a reflection of the swaddling clothing, right? Of this child that refuses to be responsible. So this idea of progress or perfectionism in America's hands, right, allows the country and those who are committed to it as central parts of their identity to evade the bitterness at the bottom of the cup. Right? To inhabit the lie as a constitutive part of who they are. And so Baldwin's Begin Again, this is really late, because I get the title of the book from just above my head.
Right.
His last novel. And, you know, it's a behemoth. That's a huge novel, right? It needed a good editing. But what Jimmy's trying to do is not only tell the story of gospel music, he's trying to really deal through this art form with the history of our people in some ways. And so he's saying in this moment in the novel where he says, you know, after King is assassinated, the dream was shattered, you know, people scattered, you know. And he says, you know, some people were murdered, some people were dead, some people were thrown in jail, some people lost their minds, and he goes through this litany of what happened. And then he says, but we know what happened. Then he says, responsibility isn't lost. Responsibility is abdicated. And if one refuses abdication, then one begins again.
Yes.
So how do you muster the courage, the energy to push this damn boulder up the hill again? Right? You know, it's and then you realize that it's not, you know, it's not the end that is the motivation. It is actually the process, the struggle of pushing the boulder up that is the source of meaning. This is Talib Kweli's The Beautiful Struggle, right? That becomes the essence of what we do, right? And so, but Baldwin will then pull that thread by the time by the time cancer's eating his throat away, and invoke Revelation 2nd chapter, verse 5. Do one's first works over.
That's right.
So what does it mean, Eddie, if you want to reinvent yourself as a Black man in this moment? If you want to be more loving, more caring, more open to the brilliance and mystery of the world, what does it mean to do one's first works over? Well, I got to go back and understand what blocked it in the first place.
Right.
I got to get in that space of vulnerability when he could look at me and I would cry, and my brother would yell at me, stop looking at him, he wants you to cry. Right? So what does it mean to go back to that moment, the choices that were made in that moment in order to unlock a different way of being in the world? Begin again, do one's first work over, right? This is what Baldwin is asking us in this moment, right? To tell the truth about who we are, to tell the truth about what we've done in order to release ourselves into a different possibility.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And one of the things I think you cannot lose in this book is that the revisitation of one's first work sometimes necessitates us walking backwards and then getting on our knees and crawling. Right? Right.
What were you up to? What were you up to in this? Right? I mean, in some ways, to tell that story, to you know, because the next sentence after you read, we recall what we can and what we desperately need to keep ourselves together. Wounds, yes, historical and painfully present, threaten to rend the soul, and if that happens, nothing else matters. Right? So, what does it mean to grapple with wound and pain?
Right. Right.
So what were you doing when you? I know I'm turning the
I was
tables,
trying to,
but
brother. I'm pretty basic. I'm a Baldwinite. I was trying to revisit those first works, bro, and trying to find joy. Ironically, because I couldn't feel joy just until I used my art to go backwards. But I think it's important that your book and Baldwin's work, he's not saying start over. Like start over is not the same as begin again. I just think we need to understand that, and y'all will understand that when you get the book. I want to make sure we get some questions in here as we continue this conversation.
Sure.
One of these questions, which is I think a really great question, is where should a novice reader start with reading Baldwin?
At the beginning.
Autobiographical notes?
Yeah.
Go Tell It on the Mountain?
No, I think jump into Notes of a Native Son, that first volume, right?
Yeah.
And I think, so I would always urge folk to just buy that Library of America edition, and then get The Evidence of Things Not Seen, and then add it to my brother who's gone on to glory, Randall Keenan's wonderful edited volume. It's been a hard year, man. So and just because this is what I say, right, is that Baldwin, even the young Baldwin, understands the themes that are circling around in his head. And what we have to do as readers, as close readers of him, is to understand the through line, right? That's not to say that he's holding the same idea consistently across the body of 7,000 pages of work. But there are some themes, there's a continuity of themes that he's grappling with. And what is he dealing with as a young man with Notes and Go Tell It, and how does that shift by the time he's dealing with The Evidence of Things Not Seen with the Atlanta child murders?
Yes.
Just think about how he characterizes his daddy from the beginning book to the end. His judgment by the time he is his judgment of his father in the end is so much more generous than what it was in the beginning.
Yeah.
And so I would urge people to start with Notes and then apprentice yourself in the evolution of his sentences. Absolutely.
And the evolving of his sentences, right? Because there's this evolution, and then at the end, when he's writing for Playboy, there's a devolving of the sentences. And the
yeah, and I think that post No Name, what he's doing at the level of form is really fascinating to me, because No Name is, and I make this argument in the book, No Name formally is his most innovative book of nonfiction. And what follows No Name, because, he called, excuse my language, this mighty motherfucker. Right, trying to finish it in the midst of a nervous breakdown, trying to finish it in the midst of trying to pick up the pieces of another failed broken relationship, in the face of the country's betrayal. But what follows it is really fascinating, because it unleashes all of the formal innovation of the work that comes after.
Yes.
So you can't understand what he's doing, in my view, if Bill Street could talk. What makes that novel possible is what he frees himself of in No Name. How is he thinking about Black English? What is the way in which blues as a form is showing up? What are the residual traces of the Black arts movement in his innovation? How can we, all of these sorts of questions kind of help us understand those sentences post 72, in my view.
And that answer makes me want to ask you a question that I would ask you privately. So I want to believe that Baldwin is remixing traditional notions of American exceptionalism, for example, in autobiographical notes. I want to believe that. I don't think I can substantiate that claim, but I want to believe it. But at the end of that essay, he writes that he loved America more than any other country in the world. Therefore, he insists on the right to perpetually criticize her, right? Mm-hmm. So on one hand, he's saying, I love America more than any other place in the world. This is before he's gone all across the world also. But then he says, that love necessitates me criticizing her perpetually. Is that a kind of American exceptionalism, or is it something else?
I don't know if it's, in the early phases, it could very well be. But there's an echo of that same formulation in No Name in the Street.
Right.
In the last paragraph, he says, to be an Afro-American or an American Black is to be in the situation intolerably exaggerated of all those who have ever found themselves part of a civilization which they could in no wise honorably defend, which they were compelled indeed endlessly to attack and condemn, and who yet spoke out of the most passionate love, hoping to make the kingdom new, to make it honorable and worthy of life. Right? So it's a shift in valence and register, right? But there is still this sense of attachment, right? Because Baldwin is always going to be from some place, somewhere, somewhen. Even if he chooses, you know, this to be a diasporic traveler, a transatlantic traveler, he's fundamentally shaped by the contradictions of this place, and his subject is us. And he's trying to find vantage points from which to say something about us that gets to the heart of the matter, it seems to me. So I don't think by the end, he's trying to get out of the American exceptionalist frame. And it's because he doesn't begin with the idea that America is chosen, or the Redeemer nation, or the city on the hill, right? He begins, right, in the ghettos of Harlem. He begins in the cotton fields of Mississippi and Alabama, of the Black Belt. He begins in the example of that, in the example that reveals the lie.
Absolutely, I feel that. I like that answer. I like that answer. Let me get the second question we have in here. This is connected. Were there ever any questions or challenges about Baldwin's place in the movement after moving overseas?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You know, in No Name in the Street, he tells the story of Dorothy Counts, or he misremembers the story of Dorothy Counts, right? So Dorothy Counts is one of the young students who are trying to integrate schools in North Carolina, and she's subject to this extraordinary violence. He says he sees that image and he decides that he can no longer just simply talk about the matter. It's time that he puts himself on the line, right? There's a sense in which he's always grappling with his tangible, concrete relationship to the movement. David Lemming writes that he joined CORE and SNCC, that he was a member of those two organizations, right? And, you know, in Fern Margie Ekman's book, he's actually at an action in Selma in 63, before 65, in 63 with SNCC, and detailing it. In a way, she interviews him the day after he comes back from that experience with Sheriff Clark and those folk. So he's grappling with it. And of course, he's grappling with not only being overseas, his relationship to the movement, he's grappling with how those in the movement view him and his sexuality. He's grappling with class distinctions, right? There's a reason why I think him and King kind of moved about each other in a particular sort of way. King is Atlanta bourgeois, and those of us who know what that is, we know exactly what that is. And Baldwin isn't from Sugar Hill.
Right.
And so those class elements are evident there too. But yeah, he's grappling with that.
And you do this amazing thing in Begin Again, where you highlight a bit of I don't know if to call it tension or make believe tension, or whatever he had going on with Richard Wright. But what you really do is you foreground what Eldridge Cleaver did to Baldwin, and you talk about the hypermasculinity and of the nationalist movement at that time. And so I wonder, by Baldwin's end, do we see him pushing back on traditional ideas of hypermasculinity? And second question, do we see him ever embracing a Black feminist or womanist liberatory like optic?
He, you know, in some ways he pushed back on the hypermasculinist politics of Black power.
Right.
But, you know, what didn't make it in the book, I just couldn't fit it narratively, in terms of the narrative. was the way Audre Lorde handed him his ass.
Ooh. In Essence, was it Essence?
Yeah, but you know, the full interview.
Yes.
Not just the edited, the way in which she really took him to task.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's, you know, talking with my close writing partner, Imani Perry, you know, there's a sense in which there are moments when Jimmy's invoking these tropes of manliness and the like that really don't quite square with the sophistication of his analysis.
Right.
And which demand of us a different kind of reading of what he's doing in those moments. Yeah. So when you read Male Prison, you know he has this, or Freaks, you know he has this really complicated reading of these gender categories and how we think of sexuality. But then there are these moments rhetorically where he enters into these kind of patriarchal formulations that betray the complexity and nuance of what we see in Male Prison or the Freaks essay. So rhetorically, what are we doing? What are we seeing here? What is he doing in those moments? Are they akin to those moments when he says, I picked the cotton, I bailed, you know, those sorts of moments? I don't know, but I do know that Baldwin's presence complicated this kind of hyper-masculinist pose.
Right.
But I didn't come across in the archive, right, an explicit and direct engagement by a critique of that pose.
No doubt.
If that makes sense.
It definitely makes sense. Man, okay, we have about 5 minutes, but this is a great question. Then I have one more question I want to ask you, Sue.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I don't know if I have a question. This is from one of the listeners right now. I have a question about your discussion of bearing witness at a time when cell phone footage of anti-Black violence has become ubiquitous. As you write in the book, the footage shatters the innocence, but does not guarantee anything like justice, and we risk becoming numb to it. Given this risk and the weariness many may feel as another video circulates without leading to significant change, what does it mean to bear witness today?
That's a hard question, you know, and, you know, I think, you know, when I think of the cell phone footage, I keep going back to, you know, Sontag's essay on the pornographic, you know, how our death and suffering can take on this kind of pornographic feel. But we need the evidence,
right,
because they don't believe us. You know, so you got this kind of these competing things, right? So if we didn't have the video footage, they wouldn't believe it happened. Think about how long it took for those white men to be arrested who killed Ahmaud Arbery. Only the footage made it possible.
Right.
Right. But then the footage is looped, and then we consume, right, the death over and over again. It's like looking at, you know, pornographic images and getting titillated, right? Having these orgiastic kind of emotional responses to Black death and suffering. But, you know, what it means to bear witness, to answer the question more directly, is to make the suffering real, right? I found that in Margie Ekman's papers, right? When I got a hold of those, transcripts, Kiese, and I'm looking, because, you know, the novel isn't, I mean, the biography isn't that good, because she tries to psychoanalyze him.
Right.
And I'm wondering why she didn't pick this out. He says, you're at the mercy of something which has nothing to do with you, nothing to do with your career, nothing to do with your ambitions, nothing to do with your loneliness, nothing to do with your despair. It had to do simply with the division of labor in this world. And this was your job. This is what you were here to do. You know, to translate somehow, if you could, by whatever means you could find, the way I see it. In any case, you know, I found myself in the Deep South looking at the eyes of a Black boy or girl of 10, you know, to make it real, to force it on the world's attention. Oof. So what does it mean to bear witness in this moment, Doc? Tell the story.
Tell the story.
Make it real for those who refuse to believe it. right?
it.
And that isn't just contingent upon a damn cell phone image.
Yes. Yes. Okay, we got to do this in Mississippi. And I think it's okay for us to tell everybody our dream was to do this with our sister Jasmine. So hopefully we can make that happen. But before we get up out of here, I want to ask, this is a question that's actually coming deep from my heart. I want to know what Eddie thinks and feels about this question. Again, I want to use some of your language and to guide us into a question. So you write, in the end, facing bleakness of his time, almost destroyed Jimmy. It took everything in him to survive it and to bear witness on the other side. How he survived may very well help us as we risk everything for a new America. And so I'm interested in whether there's anything that Mississippi needs that the nation does not. What would Baldwin say? And most importantly, what does Eddie say? Is there anything that Mississippi needs? And is there anything that we need to do when risking everything as Mississippians that might be different than what we might have to do as Americans? And maybe there's a conflation there. But I want to ask you to get up into your language a little bit and poke and prod if you can.
Yeah. I'm gonna fumble here.
Okay.
Fits and starts. What would it mean? Let me begin with an abstract example and make my way to the concrete. There's something Baldwin understood that all of those nieces and nephews he loved, that those future generations required something of him. That love for them could be the wind beneath his wings, right? To continue to fight for a more just world. Mm-hmm. And the example I keep getting in my head is that, you got the enslaved woman whose experience of slavery is such that she has no reason to imagine her life could be otherwise. But she sees love in the eyes of this man who could be snatched from her just for a moment. Or she hears the sound of innocence in the yard just for a moment. Her baby sounded like a baby. And that fleeting moment of love and attachment becomes the spur to imagine an otherwise, to see oneself beyond the opacity of one's condition. What can Mississippi do? Look at all those starving babies. Mm. All those folk who are just trying to figure out how to make ends meet, to deal with the depths of its contradiction, to see the fullness of the humanity of the people who make Mississippi, Mississippi. Mississippi, bro, and this is not melodrama, this is from the heart. If we get it right, we've solved the puzzle.
Everything.
Kiese, if we figure this out, I'm getting emotional. If Mississippi figures this out, we've solved the riddle of the Sphinx. That's it. And that cuts from the depths of poverty to the brilliance of our culture. If we respond to that question, we unlock it all. That's not an answer, but you get it.
That's a great answer, man. Let me just say, bro, thank you. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for loving us. And thank you for loving yourself, bro. You came in this game as a ferocious writer, but you are on some other level of artistry right now. I'm saying that as your brother and saying that as somebody who loves these words and these sentences. So thank you for loving yourself enough to continue to witness and to create beauty in the witnessing, because they're not the same thing. So thank you. You want to say anything before we get up out of here?
Love you, bro.
Love you too, man. Richard, Sammy.
Let me just say thank you both for a remarkable conversation, and Eddie for this remarkable book.
Thank you, Richard. I appreciate it. I appreciate y'all.
See y'all soon.
Stay safe. Stay safe. Oh, stay safe.
Mississippi, yo, we got to do it. It's on us.
It is
All right.
indeed.